if I could ask you some questions about the money part, because that seems to
Sure.
be one of the most alarming concerns with regard to dismantling the Department of Education is what happens with Pell Grants? What happens with Title I funding for underprivileged kids? Now, I know you just mentioned that kids in the more impoverished areas are getting the most money spent on them, which I find crazy. I did not know that. So maybe that sort of answers this question that I'm asking. But for kids in poor areas, what happens when there isn't that federal infusion of money? Will they suffer for lack of tablets in school, lack of quality teachers, and so on?
No, it's sort of an apples and oranges kind of issue here, because I'll tell you, here's why. About 10 to 12%, maybe 8 to 12% of a school's budget typically comes from the federal funding in the first place. It's mostly funded through other sources anyway. The issue at the poorly performing inner city schools and in poorer districts, where you have a higher per student expenditure, I can't emphasize that enough. A lot of the poorest school districts, in the inner cities included, have the highest per student expenditure and the worst results to go along with it, which have been worsening over time. The issue is really the fact that teacher quality is lacking.
Right.
That's the issue. The number one factor, and I mean, certain people might listen to this and just say, this is so obvious. Why is he bothering to say it? Yet in other corridors, this is like a novel thing to say. So whichever category you're in, I'm just going to say it. The number one factor that determines a student's long-run academic performance is the quality of the teachers that he has along the way. Period.
Right.
And yet, in most school districts, including in my own home state of Ohio, less than half of the money allocated to public schools goes towards classroom instruction. It doesn't make any sense. The best teachers in public schools undoubtedly deserve to be paid a lot more than they are right now. I think it's reasonable to ask the question right now. I mean, I talk about reviving the American dream. That's one of my passions. I live the American dream. Is it even possible to live the American dream as a public school teacher today? The fact that that's a difficult question to answer or even reflect on, I think, is a scathing indictment of where we are right now in our educational system. We're not recruiting the best and brightest because they're not going into teaching anymore. They're going into other professions. And so what I believe needs to be done, and I'm going to implement this in Ohio when I'm the next governor, hopefully, is merit-based pay for teachers. Make sure you're paying for performance, but the best ones ought to be paid a lot more than they are right now. There's other solutions that are literally cost-free that no one's talking about, where there's red tape and bureaucracy, both in my state and others. I'll give you an example. There's a lot of people who are retired, who have lived out great careers as engineers or doctors, and are in their golden years now, have that impulse to serve, to give back, to also just find purpose in retirement. I mean, to a lot of people, there's more to the third phase of your life than hitting white balls in some aimless direction. I say that as somebody who enjoys playing a round of golf from time to time is too. But they want to do something. And what do many of them want to do? They actually want to go, turns out, volunteer in schools, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade. Maybe you've had grandkids. Maybe you don't have grandkids. Maybe your grandkids are older. That's a thing that actually many people want to volunteer to do. At that age, compared to the standard of instruction in the inner cities, literally, Jillian, all you got to do is just read to them. Start with just reading books. Basic baseline for where you could start with a kid who's in kindergarten or first or second grade, and then build on that. In many cases, they're not even doing that in many inner city schools. And yet, what do those schools do? There are obstacles that stop those full-time willing volunteers who are perfectly capable, people with advanced degrees, people who are perfectly equipped and trained to be great teachers and mentors to young people. We don't let them do it. So this discussion about whether it's more or less money or how much money, it's really how the money is being spent that we ought to be talking about.
Right.
And then if there's a funding gap, look, let's have that conversation and make sure no school is underfunded. But that is the wrong discussion in an environment where that money in the most funded schools is being squandered so badly that the kids are actually performing worse at the end of it.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the podcast, please like, comment, subscribe, and share. And make sure to let me know what guests you want to see on in the future.